At Jackson Water, we are in the game and locked in on our goals. Every day, our dedicated teams are hard at work, ensuring that clean, reliable water flows to every home and business in Jackson. We are not just fixing pipes. We're investing in a brighter, more resilient future for our city. Jackson Water, water for all the time.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for Wlbt Plus. My name is Kara Shirley, your digital news desk host, and I am joined by a very important person here at Wlbt.
Oh.
She is our creative services director, but she is here today not in that role, but she is here in a filmmaker role. She has written and created a documentary called Farming Freedom. And Kayla Thomas. Kayla, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much.
I watched your documentary. Of course, we aired it yesterday at 11 on WLBT, and we're going to tell you in just a little bit how you can go back and watch it, because I know you're going to want to. But this documentary, you talked about and told the story of Black land ownership in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And it was really a very impactful story, but it was a very important story to you because it wasn't just Mississippi history, but it was a story of your family.
Yeah.
I think that is so awesome.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about the documentary.
Yeah, no, again, thank you for inviting me on here today. I'm really excited to talk about this. So, like you mentioned, it's not just a story about just in general, Mississippi farmers, because that's not how it started. It really started as a story, as a video project for me to interview my grandfather, find out about my family's history, and just learn about, actually document it, because it was a story that I had been told my whole life. My great-grandfather acquired this land. I actually grew up on that land. And so I grew up hearing this story. So I wanted to get it on camera to make sure that the family had this story documented forever. But what ended up happening as I was interviewing him, I just heard things that were so much deeper than just our story. Something that I felt like other people could relate to. I heard a story that I imagine mirrored the story of so many other Black farmers, and that's where that research and that journey began. It's like, okay, let me dive into this a little bit deeper and see how common this particular experience is for other Black farmers in that time. And apparently it was very common. It was a very similar experience. And so that through telling their story, I was able to tell the story of many Black farmers in Mississippi.
Yes. And the story, it goes back all the way back to the slave times, and then moving into sharecropping, and just the whole history.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about the history of the ownership for Black Americans.
Definitely. Absolutely. And so like you mentioned in the documentary, it starts as far back as the Civil War. So that's the starting point of the history lesson that we have there on the documentary. So once enslaved people were freed after the Civil War, there were several things that happened that obstructed them from owning land. So one of those things were Black codes. So Black codes were enacted, and these laws prohibited land ownership, among other things. Black people could not marry other races, could marry white people, couldn't do a few other things, had to work on the labor contracts. But one of the big things out of that as it pertains to the documentary is that you couldn't own land. You were outlawed from owning land. And so from that, the codes were short-lived because they were dismantled pretty quickly. But those impacts stayed for a while, because out of that grew sharecropping. And so with sharecropping, that was a way that you could have someone work your land, but they were supposed to get a share of that crop. And with getting a share of that crop, that was supposed to be some kind of income, some kind of revenue. But because you owed so much throughout the year from stuff that you bought from the store on the plantation, or whatever your expenses were, if you needed to go to the doctor, all these things added up. So by the end of the year, even though you were supposed to get a certain share of that crop, you really only got a couple $100s. And so we talk about sharecropping, and so why it was so important for this group of people to break out of that because they wanted their own land, because they knew you couldn't get anywhere. You were in a debt cycle as far as sharecropping went. So you were just going to be in debt for the rest of your life. So the answer to that, if you were a farmer, because you also have to think about farming as a career, so they weren't just, working somebody else's land. This is what they knew how to do. This is what they had been trained to do. This was their expertise,
Right.
so this is their career, and so how do I take this career and feed my family and not just make somebody else's dreams come true for the rest of my life, And so that's what they saw in land ownership. And so by gaining that land ownership, you gain so many things. You got so much, power, so many liberties, so many freedoms were launched just through your land ownership.
Yes. And the land ownership that you talk about here is from your great grandfather, who was the landowner, John Harris. He was able to purchase 120 acres.
Yeah.
And where was that at?
That was in Deason, Mississippi, in Bolivar County.
And
in the Delta.
So he purchased that land and then was able to farm it. And then now your grandfather owns that land and is able to farm it and actually kind of bring it forward more, a lot more.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about the story of your great grandfather, John Harris, and him being able to purchase this land.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, he grew up, first of all, his father was enslaved. So we're talking about somebody who was born after enslavement. So I didn't even think about this. So I was having a conversation with a friend of mine this morning, and he pointed out the fact that being that he was the first, being that he was born after enslavement, that makes him the first person in my line of family to be born free. So that's like very significant when I look at it from that perspective, because here is the first Harris in my bloodline that was born a free person and led to everything that I've been able to do with my life, up to this point. So, and that wasn't very far away. I mean, this is just my great grandfather. This is my father's father. Yeah. This is not that far away, And so that's a starting point for John Harris, is that his parents were enslaved. And so when he was 5 or 6 years old, he actually went to go live with another family, because that was also a common thing, was that sometimes your children as Black people were sent to live with white people, because they needed playmates for their kids, or they needed somebody to, clean, or, just different things. And so they actually, solicited Black children a lot of times. And so they grew up in those households. And so my grandfather grew up in a white household. Actually, Walter Sillers Jr., one of the longest Mississippi Speaker House of Representatives, was his playmate. That's the house that he grew up in Rosedale. So he grew up in that house, and now the Sillers family, they're huge. You have buildings named after Walter Sillers right now. So I thought that was a really interesting detail. But he grew up, and and he went out. He worked as a sharecropper for years, and the story talks about how he was working on that plantation in Perthshire, the Knowlton plantation. And so through that story, you're gonna just hear about how he found his way off of that land, found a way to acquire his own land, and so, and that's always just been the story of him, is that he found a way to get this land, and in getting that land, that gave us, a launching pad as a family to have, some things that other people weren't able to have.
Right. And generations later, here it is still in the family, when even though a lot of Black Mississippians were able to eventually purchase land, things happened to where the land, it got taken away, or they lost the land. And so I think that's a huge thing, that the land is still in your family.
Yeah, that was a big deal that I didn't put together until this documentary came to be. So in my research, I learned that more than 90% of Black land has been lost or dispossessed over time. So when you think about it like that, and you look at it like that, and you think about personally that you actually are a Black person that still owns land, that's huge. That's significant, considering that so many others have lost it. So we're a part of a very small percentage of Black people that actually still have their land. And through the documentary, it'll explain like how land was lost, just different mob violence is one of the things. You have people who were attacking you even during Reconstruction, but then also because when you think about that, your mind probably goes to like pre-civil rights, like, you know, the 60s and maybe the 50s and the 40s. But I'm talking about immediately right after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction period, people were attacking Black people. So you could not have anything. You know what I mean? So it's like there was mob violence right at the gate, you know. So all these things got in the way from these people being able to you know, advance themselves and, like, you know, just like establish themselves as citizens, as Americans, you know. And so you know, it's just, that's just a big piece of it. But, you know, like I said, knowing now that if you actually still have that land, it's very significant because, like I said, so many people have lost their land, you know. And then also, in addition to mob violence, the other thing that I never considered was the impact of the Great Migration. So, you know, we always learned about the Great Migration in school, and we learned that, you know, this was a period of time where a lot of Black Americans left the South and moved north, you know, for different opportunities, jobs, escaping racism, things like that. But what that also did was that left some land abandoned, you know, because you were ran off your land because people were, you know, doing whatever, you know, attacking you or whatever it was. So you ran to the north, but then you also left your land behind. So that's land loss, you know. And then you also have another scenario where, you know, my great grandfather, so even though he acquired 120 acres of land before he passed away, actually when he retired, he sold half of that. So he sold 60 of those acres, which also is a form of Black land loss, because that came from a lack of knowledge and understanding that you don't have to sell your land to retire. That's not how you retire. That's not how you build wealth. You know what I mean? The way you could have retired is leasing to a commercial farmer, which is what my granddad did with the remaining 60 acres. So he's retired, but the land is still in the family and it's under the LLC, the family LLC, because he leased it to a commercial farmer. So, you know, just more knowledge, more understanding, more, you know, access. All these are the things that would help Black people retain their land, but then also close that wealth gap, because you have some people with land who still don't know how to really monetize it. You know, you don't really know how to make money off of it, you know, but you have a neighboring farm that's, you know, huge commercial farmer, you know, very lucrative. And you're just like, how, you know, but you have to find those resources and those advocacy groups and things like that. And that's also what the documentary talks about.
Yeah. It's not just the documentary telling about this story, but it's also a very educational thing to educate people on this subject.
Yes.
Very, very important. There were so many things I learned in watching it that I didn't even know. You know, so that's what I loved about it a lot. And tell us, what was probably the most challenging part of the pre-production work on this?
Oh man, dwindling it down to hour and a half.
Isn't that so hard?
That was hard.
You got this baby. You got this big baby. You got to cut a lot out of it.
Oh man, that was so hard, because like I also mentioned, you know, this started as a family video project. So there were a ton of details that were like really important to me and the family that just wouldn't really apply on a larger scale, you know, like to a larger audience. So it was a lot of like letting go of some stuff that was important to me, probably not important to everybody else. So that was hard.
I can imagine. I can imagine just from doing you know, editing stories here or things like that. It's hard.
That was hard. That was really hard.
It's hard.
Cool.
What are some of your favorite scenes in the documentary?
Oh man. Oh, you know what? My granddad, he's funny. He's a character, you know. So
I got that feeling.
You know, so you mentioned, you know, he's a big part of the interviews, and so he's just so funny to me. Like he talked about when they were on the plantation and they would go out and court, you know, go courting with the girls, you know, try to holler at the girls and stuff like that. And just the way he told that story was so funny. He said he'd ride around in his dad's car, and you know, he had a car, so he was the coolest thing going. You know what I mean? Like if you were a kid with a car, you had the girls. That's you know, that's what he said. And so it was just so funny because he mentioned that everybody else was just you know, riding on bicycles or walking. And so if he came around with a car, he had his car loaded with girls, and he would go get them ice cream. And he made a comment that he didn't care what they looked like, even if they were ugly, he'd let them in the car. I was like, that's awful. So just little comments like that were just so funny. That's what I enjoyed that.
I not only just hearing the complete story, but getting to see those, I guess, kind of inside moments of your grandfather's life as a child.
Thinking about just really like picturing and visualizing him as a young man was just really fun, you know, because you just don't think about that when you meet them. They're already old, you know, because they're your grandparent, you know. So like my earliest memory of you're already an old man. but like really having that moment to like reflect, or that, just that opportunity to hear in detail what your life was like growing up. It's like a 15-year-old or 16-year-old, or even an 18-year-old. I could just really picture it and I could visualize it, and it was just really cool.
So, what and maybe either other films or filmmakers inspired you in the creation of this?
Oh man, I've been obsessed with PBS all my life. So I instantly, just went into like PBS,
Yeah.
aspirational mode. You know what I mean? So I was like, well, what would PBS do with this story? You know what I mean? Like, how would they tell this story? And so that was my like, North Star, I should say. I was really trying to figure out how to make something that I felt like mimicked what I would see
Yeah.
on PBS documentaries.
And doing this, because this is your first documentary. It's your first time. You've had, I mean, a ton of years working in film and creating. Creative services director here, so you have that experience, but this is your first full-length documentary. What advice would you give to those that may be aspiring to do something like this?
Oh man, I get so excited about like stuff like this because I was blown away by how easy it can be. And I know people are probably like, easy, what? Like, no, but like really, there's so much out there now. Like I did this across 7 years. When I first started, there was not a lot on the internet. Like, I did a lot of searching. I was looking for a lot of photos, couldn't find a lot of that stuff. Was going to have to go into, archive, buildings, archive and history buildings, and really look for some of this stuff, scan it myself, and all this like really, really like, manual work. But each year there was more out there on the internet. The Library of Congress digital archives grew over that time, and like the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, their digital collection grew. So like there were so many photos out there just on the internet, like, I mean, obviously, it was on their like websites, like, so you have to get them through their permission, but it's there, and so many academic journals written that are published on the internet, like so much research out there at your fingertips that I can imagine it was way harder to do this like years ago before, the internet just made things so accessible. So I say, if you got an idea, start some research, start on the internet, see what's out there on the Library of Congress website, because they're full of, videos and images. And I would build a story around what I see is available. You know what I mean? Like I would explore that route next. Like, so like I would go on the Library of Congress website and kind of comb through that and see, what are some of the collections that they have, because all those collections are stories. They are full of stories, and stories that you might not even imagine, stories you wouldn't even thought to tell. But you see an image that really sparks your interest, and you're just like, well, I want to dig into that, and you find out it's a really good story.
It's kind of the way this started with you. You just wanted to document your grandfather to have that, and it turned into this.
It's a really good story, and so that's my advice. I would say just do it. Go out there, see what's out there, and see what what materials you'll be able to have access to. Because I can imagine it's probably harder the other way, where you're trying to build this story, but you find out you don't really have any ways to really, illustrate what's happening. You don't really have any images that speak to what you're saying. So that can get really hard, and that probably can get discouraging, especially if it's your first one. So I would say try to make it a little easier on yourself and look for something that already has a lot of images to support it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So how do you plan to distribute this film and reach a wider audience? Of course, we played it on Wlbt yesterday, and we do have it available for you to watch. We're going to tell you how to do that in a little bit. But what are your plans to get it out farther?
Yeah, I'm really working on that right now. So I've taken some workshops to find out, how do you do that whole thing, right? Because it's a whole new journey as far as it's called, distribution, as far as that goes. So learned a lot. I've got my deck, you call it, together, so I'm gonna start shipping that out and start sending that to people. Probably this weekend. It's been hectic. I've actually been planning on doing that for several weekends, and I think I finally made it to the weekend where I actually can start sending these emails out. So I'm excited to start doing that. It feels like that's the next thing,
The next thing for you.
Yeah.
And tell me, as we wrap up here, what is the most important message that you hope that the audience gets from watching this documentary?
That's a really good question. Because it's just so many different themes that are in there. You know, like you talked about sharecropping, we talked about black codes, we talked about, you know, the power of land. Also something I forgot to mention was the discrimination in lending, you know, with loans for farmers. So in the class action lawsuit that ended up being one of the largest civil rights settlements in history, you know, that proved the discrimination in loans. So it's so many things, like I said, so many history lessons. But I guess if I had to boil it down, I would say the biggest thing is the power of land ownership being illustrated. You know, like the and what I mean by that is, like I said, there's just so many things, because I forgot to mention this was, you know, there was a cemetery that John was able to establish on his land. His and that allowed him to be able to bury his children with dignity, you know, before you were subjected to the land of, you know, whatever landowner you were working for. So you probably were buried in a ditch somewhere, you know what I mean? It just wasn't a dignified burial, unmarked, things like that. So that was a big deal. If you got land, you can bury yourself with dignity. That was huge. The other part was, if you got land, you can you can build a house. You can build houses for yourselves. You can build houses for your sons and your daughters. So you have land ownership, you have dignified burials, you have, you know, generational wealth. So it's just the power of land being illustrated is what I hope people take away from that.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it so much. Well, now what we're going to do now is tell you exactly how you can go watch Farming Freedom. And I even have a little video explanation so you guys can know exactly how to do it. So the way you can do it is is through your smart TV, Roku, Apple, Google Home, Android device, anything like that, smart TV. If you go and you can download the Wlbt app. So let me get this video pulled up here for you guys. I cut off my microphone. All right. If you go and you download, this is, of course, downloading the app here on your smart TV. This is what it will look like. It will install. If you haven't already downloaded it, you should download it anyway. Anyway, you open up the app. Here it is. And not only can you watch all of our shows, but you can also watch Farming Freedom right there. And it is a 4-part documentary. It's 90 minutes altogether. You watch it, and you can watch it on our smart TV app, or just the TV app. I mean, anytime, really, I mean, most people have smart TVs now. Most people have smart TVs. So not only can you watch Farming Freedom there, but you can also watch all of our newscasts. You can watch them on demand. You can watch them live as they're happening. You can watch special investigation pieces that we've done. So many things available to you on our smart app through your TV. So make sure you go and download that. Kayla, thank you so much for coming on. And not only thank you for coming on, but congratulations to you, because this a labor of love, I know, but it's not an easy task what you did and what you put together. And it is absolutely beautifully done.
Thank you. Thank you.
I do appreciate you coming on. But now, guys, we are going to play the trailer for you for Farming Freedom. When you get home, download the Wlbt app on your smart TV, Apple TV, Roku, Android, whatever it is, and watch Farming Freedom. Here is the trailer for it.
Dad already was smart. When you're smart white man, you get pretty smart. Dad was able to buy 120 acres of land at Decent, Mississippi. It was just like the promised land.
Everyone knows that if you have land, you have power.
Daddy said, I ain't gonna have no cemetery on backside of the woods. Where white people usually give black people cemeteries.
You have generational wealth.
Dad always tried to build us our own house when he got married.
Black land ownership was at its height around 1920. However, that was the last decade where blacks owned any substantive amount of land. They began to lose land after that for myriad reasons.
Black people wanted land because they understood that's what it takes. It's just to have your own so that you can grow and build and leverage from there.
Where do we go from here?
Immediately after the Civil War, it was against the law for Black people to purchase land. The people who had fought the Union were put back in charge, so they were unfair toward Black people. And that's how sharecropping began.
Daddy would give 1/4 of his crop to the white man, but he had to pay for everything.
It was just a neo form of slavery, going from a system of no pay to very low pay, and in fact, no pay at the end of the day.
So Daddy said, well, I heard that it was selling land. I want to know if they still got some to sell.
After World War II, a lot of Black children did not want to be farmers.
I stayed to keep the land. They wasn't too much old on it, but trying to work it, that's when I got so deep in debt.
White farmers' crops failed as much as Black farmers' crops failed. But banks saw it as less of a risk to give loans to white farmers.
The lawyer explained to us we were deprived of our civil rights.
Where do we go from here? Where do we go?